as the evening. We have three very gifted storytellers into all the world. It's going to be a real treat. Rick Maupin is going to start us off as the first storyteller this evening, and when he's done, he's going to hand the microphone over to Sarah Clark, a member of the Village Heights congregation, who will share of her experience of Go Ye into all the world, or her experience of the global family of Community of Christ. When she's done, we'll have an offering opportunity. A big portion of Storytellers is about the Alma Blair internship program. How many of you knew Alma Blair as a student at Graceland University? So quite a few of you. So you know the passion that Alma Blair has for church history, for history altogether. He was the professor for the summer interns in Nauvoo for many, many years. And as such, we've named the internship program after him. And so later this evening, we're going to hear the testimony of two summer interns who had served in Nauvoo and Kirtland, Nathan and Carrie Twombly. They'll share their experience, and then you'll have an opportunity to help support the Alma Blair internship, which is a wonderful program for young adults. It's an investment in future church leadership in many ways. So it's just as much about the past as it is about the future. So after we pass the hat to collect donations for the Alma Blair internship program, then Seth Bryant will share of his experience of Go Ye into all the world. Seth is also the director at the Kirtland Temple, so who knows, we may get a little bit of Kirtland experience with him as well. When he finishes, he's going to hand the microphone over to you. Well, you'll have an opportunity, the congregation gathered here will have an opportunity to share your experience as the Community of Christ is a global family. And it could be stories of the past, it could be stories of the present, but really the theme is about Go Ye into all the world. And the great Everett Graffeo is going to be the moderator during that time. And then we'll have closing words, and then we'll be done. So how does that sound? Good. All right, that's the enthusiasm I'm looking for. Now, there is a tradition within the Storytellers program that the three main storytellers tell stories of one another, which means Rick Maupin would tell a story about Sarah Clark, and Sarah would tell a story about Seth. And come to find out, the storytellers have never really appreciated that tradition. They don't like people telling stories about them. So considering, well, there was a grand idea introduced to us that considering it is Everett Graffeo's birthday tonight, wouldn't it be great? I believe 39, was that correct? We thought, wouldn't it be great, rather than telling stories of one another, if we told stories of Everett tonight? Everybody was happy with that. I didn't even ask Everett if he was okay with it, so this is a total surprise to him. You'll notice he has a nice reddish tint to his face now. But it'll also be a celebration of Brother Graffeo. Not a thing. You'll just sit there and listen to the praise. Part of this evening. Thank you for your generosity. It's going to be a great night.
Just a clarification on the story that Everett was sharing, their first experience in Tahiti. Steve, where are you? I've lost, there you are. A clarification, what Everett probably doesn't know is Steve still has that nickel. You know him, don't you? Well, I have so many stories about Everett, but I've been given a time frame that I should work within, and so I'll be sensitive to the time. And I heard this story from a very reputable source who has a Australian accent that used to travel around with Everett. And if you can imagine, Everett was in India, and I believe it was probably Tamil Nadu, one of the southern states of India. And Everett was preaching, and he was waxing eloquently, and he was waxing eloquently, and he was waxing eloquently. Did I tell you he was waxing eloquently? And he went on. And my colleague, and Everett's colleague, happened to notice that the person who was translating for Everett, it did not appear that the translator's gestures and facial expressions were totally matching what Everett might have been saying. But Everett was waxing eloquent. He went on in a large crowd out there. And later, after the worship service, our colleague, good friend, who never embellishes a story, asked the translator, "It seems as though you and Everett may not have been in sync." And the translator said, "Oh," with a big smile, "oh, they wouldn't have understood what Everett was saying. I shared the story of the woman at the well." I understand that was not the only time, but one of the times in India when Everett would have liked to have throttled a staff member. Probably shouldn't say this, but Everett, you probably would have saved a lot of grief from Mark Hewitt and me if you would have done that and throttled that person. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you tonight. Trains, planes, automobiles, tricycles, autos as they're called in India, and if you've ever been to South or Central America, called a tuk-tuk. All of these are ways that we and many others here travel around the places that we travel and how we get to those places. Sometimes, let me back up here a second. There was a brief video that probably is best, Barb, that it didn't show up because risk management would probably have had a kid. Sometimes in places where Mark and I travel, getting from point A to point B may mean being on the back of a motorcycle. We had a little motorcycle video, but we'll just assume that that was not there. And there are other times when travel may not be as fast, but it's certainly dependable. Nepal, Gorkha, Nepal, one of our congregations. When we travel into Nepal, Kathmandu is the first place we land. And going from Kathmandu to the Gorkha congregation in that bus is between 6 and 8 hours, depending on how many stops we make and how much bus trouble there is along the way. There are no reclining seats on that bus, I can assure you. For one of my age, it was a great concern. There's no restroom on that bus. There's no air conditioning on that bus. The only thing on that bus is a lot of dust from the mountain dirt roads. And another thing on that bus is a lot of people. And many of those people you see standing have been standing for 6 to 7 hours. And what you can't see in that picture are all the young people on top of the bus that have been riding up there all day. And the other thing you can't see but it is a discovery. That discovery on my head is I discovered that the doors on the buses in Nepal are a little bit shorter than I anticipated when I got on the bus. But fortunately, it's the hardest part of my body. Well, we got to kind of the base camp and stayed overnight, and the rest of the journey required a four-wheel drive vehicle to get the other 2 to 3 hours up the mountain to the Gorkha congregation. As we're riding up the mountain, and my colleagues put me in the front, and they're riding in the back, and literally in the back, when I looked through the back window, you could not see them because the dust was so thick for the full 2 hours. We were all wearing surgical masks. And I asked the driver, what is this yellow can sitting between my feet? I thought I knew, and he said, oh. He said, the factory installed a gas tank fell off of here many years ago, so that's our fuel tank. And I said, oh. So the fuel's going through that green hose? And he said, yes. Well, and he also said, if you wouldn't mind, kind of keep your feet against the bottle so it doesn't bounce around too much. Well, he told me a little bit late because for the next 3 days, I smelled like eau de diesel fuel, soaked in diesel fuel by the time we got to the top. we finally get near the top, and dirt roads, some landslides. We had to stop for an hour or so and wait till they had removed the landslides. And I'm hoping all along, because we're now getting close to the rainy season in Nepal. And I'm just praying, oh, please, Lord, no rain today. We'll never leave here for the next month. We finally arrived. The Gorkha Community of Christ in Gorkha, Nepal. Remote, very impoverished. People there are still dealing with the devastation of the massive earthquake that happened a few years ago. These were some of the folk that were most impacted by that earthquake. Remote, impoverished, devastated, but we worshiped and we celebrated. And friends, your sisters and brothers there, they know about faith. They know about hope. They live those things every day of their lives. Your support through your prayers, your support through your financial generosity is helping the saints in Gorkha know that they are not just a remote, all-alone congregation. These people know that they are part of a global community. Thank you for helping them know that. Now, let's travel a little bit more through Nepal and look at some of the beauty that will be found in Nepal. It's almost surreal when you see the Himalayan mountains at sunset from one of the valleys. It's indescribable. We're now boarding another plane, and we're headed to the small city of Biratnagar, where Mark was just in the last 4 or 5 weeks. And as we travel to Biratnagar, the pilot says, if you will look out your left window, that highest peak, what you're looking at, and we were flying at 25,000 feet, that peak is about close to 30,000 feet. That's Mount Everest. Majestic, awe-inspiring, beautiful. However, everything in Nepal is not always beautiful. Last year in August of 2017, in Biratnagar and the surrounding area, they experienced some of the worst flooding ever recorded in history. And some of our sisters and brothers in those 2 congregations in that area had great damage to their homes. Many of them lost their houses. They lost everything. But you were there. You helped change this story. Tonight we're talking about stories. You are helping create stories. You helped change this story because many of those houses are being rebuilt. And here you can see one of the houses that's almost finally reconstructed. And it just lacks one final coat of what we would call mud, which is done by a brigade of women. Many of them are Community of Christ members who will go around, and it's almost an art where they put the mud on those homes. But more important than just the rebuilding or the construction of homes is the demonstration of community that we found there. Many of our youth, many of the youth and young adults of Community of Christ have banded together and volunteered days and weeks to help rebuild the homes in Biratnagar, in the area where they were so devastated by the flooding. And here you can see another house that's being constructed that had been totally devastated by the floods. I want you to look really close at that picture. Closer. Look really close. Do you see you there? If you have ever contributed to abolish poverty and end suffering or oblation, you're in that picture. Thank you for being Biratnagar and helping write a new story in Biratnagar, Nepal for those people. Our visit there that weekend was wonderful. The generosity, as Mark and others will share with you, the generosity and the hospitality that we found from the folk there, inviting us into their homes, was just absolutely amazing. We visited, I lost track of the number of houses we visited on that one particular day. You see the green plastic chairs in the background? Well, Diane started noticing something. Every home that we went to, the same green plastic chair showed up. And she also noticed something else. Do you see the cups on the table that we drink the Coca-Cola from? The same cups were showing up at every house also. And we got to noticing that there was this kind of chair and cup brigade that would dart around behind the houses and be there before our arrival. Now, I'll have to admit, one of my vices, there's only 2 or 3 on that list, but one of my vices is I like Coca-Cola. But after about 10 glasses of Coca-Cola that afternoon, well, we're in the bathrooms. Hey, this is my story. You were only the driver tonight. Thank you. So, she's seen my script, but I'm off script right now. So after about 10 cups of Coke, one of the ladies asked my wife, would you like to use the restroom? And Diane, in full traditional women clothing, needed to use the restroom, and so she used the traditional restroom there that Bud and Everett and others would be accustomed to. And after quite some time, she came out and she said, that was quite interesting. A wonderful week in Nepal, or a wonderful week in Britain, our weekend, and it ended with a worship service. And in Nepal, they worship on Saturdays. That's the day off. Sunday is a typical work day there. So we're worshiping in the Britnagar congregation, and every worship experience always includes an opportunity for people who have so little, an opportunity for them to graciously give to the church and the work of the church. Well, we're going to leave Nepal. I'm watching the clock, Barb, so we need to move on. We're going to leave Nepal, and now we're going to go to India. And in India, right now, we have a church presence in 4 states. India is divided into states. We have a church presence in the far southern states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And next up on the map would be the state of Andhra Pradesh. And then next is the state that Brother Graffeo referred to, the state of Odisha. There's nothing like experiencing a 14-hour ride on an Indian train. There's not many other things in life, and again, Mark and maybe Richard and others can attest to that. On an Indian train, and this is one of the better cars, on an Indian train, the quarters are very tight. The aromas are prolific all the time. And on one of my experiences, after several hours, I was tired, I was ready to come home. They were probably ready for me to go home. And I was standing there, can't sleep on the train, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm standing there just trying to say, what am I really doing here, bud? I need to be somewhere else. And I'll have to admit to you, this will probably come back to haunt me, I detest mice and rats. I'm scared of mice and rats. And I looked down, and crawling across my feet was a medium-sized rat in this train car. Oh, by the way, if you're ever on an Indian train, you might want to check the restroom before you get on the train. Because, again, there's nothing like an Indian train restroom. And some of you are looking at this picture, and I can see your minds. You've already figured out part of that. Yeah, those little pads are where your feet go. And you figured out the rest of it, right, Carrie? Oh, yeah, there's no toilet paper. Huh. Welcome to India. Well, we're back on the road in a 4x4. And, Brother Beasy, the car is stuck on a rock on your side. You're going to have to get out. And he did. And we finally unlodged the car. We were headed to a very famous place in church history, Gumiguda. We were going there for the Golden Jubilee. Now, Not only did Brother VZ have a little trouble with getting the car, well, he did get it stuck. It was stuck on the inside. But he had bought a new mosquito net. In many places where we travel, we have to use mosquito nets. And he had not unpacked his mosquito net. This was a new net. And so he spent quite some time. He doesn't know I took this picture. He spent quite some time fixing his new mosquito net. Now, the reason mosquito nets are there is for the mosquitoes. Mosquitoes never bother me for some reason. But I use a mosquito net because in that room, they call it the guest room at Gumiguda. In that room, and Mark, where are you? You know, Mark wouldn't know this because Mark just would sleep through this. That room's filled with mice. And you know how I like mice. And so I take my noise-canceling headphones as soon as I can, and I took the mosquito net in, thinking that the mosquito nets will keep any mice out of my bed. Unknowingly that mosquito net is not going to stop any healthy mice at all. But I put the headphones in, and one of the trips there, Mark and I were staying in the guest room, and one of the staff members said, by the way, there's a little restroom. It's actually a Western toilet stool there. And they said, before you go in to use the restroom at night, and after you do that, there's a little porch. Make sure you close the door on the porch after you've gone out and when you come back in. I didn't want to know why to close the door. I just closed the door. I thought I'd ask the next morning when we left. So the next morning I said, Persuna, why did you tell us to close the door? He said, well, just a few weeks ago, Rashmi was in there, Amson Malik's wife, Rashmi Malik, and in the middle of the night they heard her screaming, and they ran in, and out on the little porch was this cobra that was running in the building. Remember the mice? Okay. So they said, we fixed it though. We put up this wire. Well, the wire mesh has got holes about this big in it, all through it. So yeah, it's fixed. So we were there though to celebrate the 50th year of the church in India. Thousands of people are going to come. So what do you do with thousands of people? Where do you house them? You spend 2 to 3 weeks with volunteer crews building little shelters, those little huts that you are seeing there. Outside the hut, Brother VZ is talking to a couple of the ladies who are cooking. And in the background, you can see Brother Mark and myself visiting with some of the young adults. And the celebration begins. And it begins with a procession from the church building on the other side of the Gumiguda School to another piece of property on the other side of the village. And the procession goes on and on and on with huge trumpets, all sorts of dancing, all sorts of flags. And it goes on and on and on because there are thousands of people. As a matter of fact, it's estimated that there were over 14,000 people for the Golden Jubilee. Possibly in history, possibly, I don't know, Barb, maybe the largest gathering, or one of the largest gatherings ever in Community of Christ. As we gathered there and celebrated 50 years of Community of Christ, 50 years of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ through Community of Christ in India. And as we sat there on the stage, behind us on the stage was this huge banner, which would have covered most of this wall. The banner announcing that, but what really caught my attention on that banner, even though I've seen it thousands of times, was that logo. That logo in such a remote, in some ways desolate place, but there that logo said, we're all about God's peaceable kingdom. Another member of the presidency just recently was with Mark and I in India. And in India, we have just established 4 new mission centers. In the last 2 years, we now have 7 functioning mission centers in India. And Brother Scott Murphy here in this picture is offering the prayer of setting apart for one of the counselors, one of the officers in one of our new mission centers. And just like President VZ, President Murphy needed to get out of the vehicle. We were on our way to Gumiguda. Brother Murphy had never been there. He wanted to go to Gumiguda. We wanted to get there before dark. Well, you can see from the shadow from Brother Mark here that the shadows are getting quite long. We did not make it to Gumiguda before dark. It was well into the nighttime before we got there. But we had to take a little stop here because on the fine roads that we traveled on, we had a flat tire. But we finally arrived and the children waited for us. And these are some of the over 200 children that attend the Gumiguda School. Many of these children would never have an opportunity to an education if it were not for Gumiguda. Gumiguda School, what makes that a reality, and what's made it a reality for years, is a partnership. It's a partnership between World Ministry Mission Ties and Outreach International. These children, that's their bedroom, that's the place where they study, and tomorrow morning that will be their classroom. But they would never have this educational opportunity if it were not for that partnership. And again, I want you to look closely in that picture. Because if you've ever contributed to World Ministry Mission Ties or to Outreach International, you are part of that picture. Thank you. One more stop. We're now going to leave India, and we're going to go to the Philippines. Before we leave India, though, I would like to ask Brother Mark, at the Golden Jubilee, they produced a small souvenir booklet. And in the many years that Brother Graffeo shared there, we would like to present him this souvenir booklet from the Golden Jubilee. The famous jeepneys of the Philippines. Another way that we get around the places where we travel and share ministry. And there's a familiar face to some of you, Brother Andrew Bolton, as we're traveling to another location in the back of one of the jeepneys in the Philippines. Another historical moment happened just, was it last year, Mark? Lost track. Yeah. Last year we celebrated the Golden Jubilee, the 50th year of the church in the Philippines. And these are just a few of the people who gathered there for that celebration. Just recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was there and we had the Philippine Mission Center Conference. This is Brother Max Cabita. Everett and several others would know Brother Max Cabita. Max Cabita was one of the first 3 members of Community of Christ in 1966 in the Philippines. Brother Max Cabita served as a leader there for many years. He now serves as an evangelist. The hands that were laid on his head to ordain him the office of evangelist, I think, was Brother Everett Graffeo many years ago. That's what the records say, Everett. Everett, I don't know if you can say it's full circle, but at this Mission Center conference, this last Mission Center conference, Brother Max's daughter, Josie, some of you would know Sister Josie from the Philippines, she was called and we ordained her to the office of High Priest. Brother Max assisted me in that. And so, Brother Everett, thank you for the ways that you and many others in this room invested, and in particular to Brother Max. And over the last 3 or 4 years or longer, one of our church members, David Hallett, wrote a history of the Philippines. Mark, could you, we would like to present that small booklet to Brother Everett. Out there for Bud also. Thank you, Mark. Bud, Everett, thank you. There are about another 15 up here. We'll put them on the back table. Bud and Everett get theirs free. For the rest of you, well, they're free. But tomorrow morning when the offering plate passes by, you might want to do something a little bit extra as you remember the church around the world. Well, whether it's in a tuk-tuk, a jeepney, a tricycle, a bus, or an Indian train, one of the things we continue to learn and experience as a global community is what it means to be a servant disciple. And I want to loop back to what Brother Everett shared in his story earlier. There's nothing more humbling, but there's nothing that speaks louder than one washing another's feet. I continue to learn what it means to be a servant disciple in the many places that the church goes. And I would hope and pray that this scene represents who we are. If people don't know a lot about us, I would hope they would say, we really don't know who those people are, but we know that they are servant disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you all for helping make all these stories. You are writing these stories. Let's continue to write new stories. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Clark, and I have the privilege to come speak to you tonight about our experience, my family's experience in hosting international guests. So as I share this story, if I use the word I, it is also pertaining to my family, which is in the back row. And feel free, family, to chime in if I get things incorrect as I go along. That's how our traditional storytelling goes, is I will say something and there's a counter opinion to it. Our first introduction, or my first introduction to the international church members was when I was dating my husband, and his family hosted the Tahitians during an IYF and also during the women's conferences back in the 90s. They had a positive experience, and I remember being part of some of those memories. So in this way, Judy and Everett have helped shape this moment, because they helped plant the seed that Tahitians would be a part of the Village Heights community, and therefore part of my husband's family tradition. And tonight I'm here because of a prompting and perhaps a prodding on behalf of Everett and Barb to share. My story about Everett is that he's a man that I've always respected and been a little intimidated by. He stands tall and straight, and I know that I cannot slouch when I'm with him. I need to do my best. In the same way, when he serves and he calls me to join in, I cannot say no. I need to get myself together and do my best. And when it was time for me to have my evangelist blessing, I knew that he was the one to give me direction and keep me challenged. And so here I am, ready to serve and follow in Jesus' example, but lived out for me by Everett. And so, some things you need to know about me is that I sound like I'm going to cry, and it's mostly because of nerves, and I get really shaky up here. So I brought some little putty that I took from my son's bedroom. So if I'm playing with this and you're curious about what it was, it started out a really pretty purple color and has pink glitter in it, and now it just looks really yucky, but hopefully that will calm me. I'm used to teaching and talking a lot, and Joe Bayless comes to my school often to substitute, so he will attest to the fact that I'm not used to teaching and talking to people who are looking at me all the time and paying attention. I've spent my career in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, so feel free to take your coat off, take it, put it on, put it over your head, wear it like a hat, see if you can make a ponytail out of it, crawl under the pew, get up to go to the bathroom, come back. I mean, that would make me feel a lot more at ease. So, he's laughing. Am I exaggerating?
But you're a great teacher. The kids love you.
Well, thank you. Brett and I have always wanted to continue with the tradition of hosting. And in 2013, we had, and I hope my years are right, we had the opportunity to host 4 Tahitian boys, and we were so excited. We eagerly prepped our house, got the beds ready, bought groceries. However, it wasn't until we were alone with the young men when we suddenly realized that the few phrases that we had been taught in Tahitian and French weren't going to help us have a very well-rounded conversation. It was a delightful experience to have 4 teenage boys in our home. We saw them in every range of emotion. They were excited and nervous. They were unsure and then confident. They were homesick and energized and exhausted. It was humbling to see them persevere in a different culture, in a different time zone, and do it with grace and gratitude. It was truly a gift. During their stay, we found ways to communicate and found that laughter was the most universal. Our first laughter moment came 20 minutes after picking them up from the temple. We found ourselves in Golden Corral buffet in hopes that would offer a range of food that would satisfy them. And as we were standing at the drink station to get our beverages, the boys erupted in giggles. They were covering their mouths and pointing, and we couldn't figure out what it was that had them so riled up. And we quickly realized then that it was root beer that had got their attention. And when we were trying to explain with the language barrier that it was not alcohol, because they were just saying beer, beer, beer. And we were trying to explain to them this was not alcohol. I did not want them to go home to their parents and tell them that Americans served that freely at the buffet next to the Pepsi and Sprite. And trying to explain that was kind of fun. We thought that they might like the assortment of fish or vegetables, and found that they really just like beef and pork and lots of it, and that our fish and fruit must pale in comparison to what they were used to. And it was our pleasure to spoil them by serving a pound of bacon every morning that was gone like that, because it was such a treat for them to have. And I gladly bought Pepsi and sent a can with them every morning to IYF, and my children will tell you I do not buy pop for them anymore. But it was so nice to share in that with them. Our next opportunity to host was during the 2016 conference, and this time we hosted guests from Africa, and we weren't really sure through our communication how many we were getting, when they were coming and everything, and we were going to reunion, and I was directing junior camp, and we had lots of things going on. And then we finally got the numbers and found out we were going to have 5 people, and we thought maybe it was 3. And so we thought, okay, well, we can still do this. So we made some more preparations, and then we thought they were all coming from the same country, and then found out it was from 3 different countries. But that was still okay, because there were still some English-speaking people coming. And then we were told they were supposed to arrive like at 10 o'clock at night, and we live out in the country, and it's kind of hard to find, so Brett was going to meet them up at McDonald's at 24 and 291 and lead them back to our house. And so we all got in the car to go up there to welcome them, and then to drive back to our house. And we went up there and sat in McDonald's parking lot for 2 hours just to find out that the planes were delayed and that they weren't on their way from the airport. So 2 hours with tired kids in a McDonald's parking lot. We went home, put them to bed, said you'll meet the guests in the morning. And we stayed awake for another couple of hours, and then I think Brett went back up to McDonald's, and then people followed us home, and there were several vans, and they all unloaded. Everyone had to go to the bathroom because it was the first stop after the airport, and so we had people just in and out of the bathrooms and just saying hi to them in the middle of the night. And then as Gunda was getting ready to leave and getting people loaded up, he says, can you take one more guest? Sure we can at this point, why not? It's 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll have to sleep on the couch tomorrow, but we'll do better for the next night. So it just goes to show that if God's in the works, that it really doesn't matter. All these other things that you plan for and you prepare for just are not of real importance. And so Sako Dixon was our bonus guest, as we referred to him, and he was very proud to have that title. In fact, when he introduced himself to people at conference, he would say, I'm their bonus guest. And I can't imagine our experience without him there. I learned a lot about Africa that I didn't know. A lot of my perceptions of what Africa was like are stereotypical. I had never really thought about referring to the countries in Africa as a third world country, but I realized that that was really disrespectful to people who held master's degrees and spoke several languages fluently and multiple dialects. I have a master's degree, but I don't speak several languages, and I don't do dialects, and all of these things that they were able to do. So I don't refer to those countries that way anymore, and just see that differently. I think that learning a second language is exciting, but it's also very scary to try to then speak it to someone who might really understand or not understand what you're saying. In high school, I took Spanish, and but listening to the exchange in our home of these 3 different countries and the dialects and all the different variations of things that they spoke, I realized that maybe it's just an American thing that we're all hung up on learning another language, or we should just have one language that everyone speaks, because they were all the time saying, how do you say that in your language? How do you say that in that dialect? And they would try to repeat it, and they'd say, no, you're saying it wrong, like this. And then he'd try. I mean, it was just back and forth. And it was just, that's how you learn a language, and that's how it's not scary. And so I have a new view on that now. Our 6 guests were with us for 18 days during the international pre-conference and the conference, and then before they left. And during that time, we were able to celebrate Kawia's birthday, one of our guests from Liberia, our daughter's birthday, and Joseph from Malawi received his master's degree diploma in the mail. And each event brought a special celebration. That's a lot of celebrating within a short period of time. When we found out it was Kawia's birthday, we put up some sports decorations left over from Luke's previous birthday party. And it was really exciting to see a grown man be so excited about a birthday banner with footballs on it and little soccer decorations. But he went around and looked at all of those, and I don't know exactly what that would have been like to have a birthday in Liberia as an adult, but he was excited, and I overheard him talking to his family on the phone that night and saying, and they had decorations all over, and telling them about these things. We gave him a birthday card, and it was one of the musical ones that opened, and when play music when you opened it, and that was an amazing hit too. All of our guests began dancing when the music started, and they continued to tease Kawia throughout the conference that they would hear it periodically at the temple or the auditorium. I think I heard that music playing today because he had tucked it in his bag and taken it with him to his meetings. And we had cake or cupcakes and ice cream, but we quickly found out that they would pass up a serving of cake in order to have extra icing. So we dispatched with the cake and just bought more icing for the next event, or more ice cream. For our daughter Brianna's 14th birthday, they shared a tradition from their respective countries and their families. And it just really gave me chills to have them sing and do traditional things of love and hope and blessing that they bestowed on my daughter. That they sang her songs in their languages and told her poems and stories that they would have shared with their children. It was beautiful. Our 3rd celebration was Joseph's completion of his master's degree in theology, and he was able to complete this when he was in Malawi, but he had not received his diploma, and we had to contact the university, and he wanted to drive to Joplin to go pick it up, and I said, oh, they can just mail it to us. I think we can have that happen. Because he's like, well, that's not very far. Joplin's not very far. And, no, it's not. When you've come from Africa, but they can mail it to us, and we'll receive it while you're here. And so while he was at meetings during the day, the mail came, and we saw that it had come. And so we headed off to Party City and saw that the graduation items had been clearanced by that time, and we were able to pick up some more banners and balloons and some little graduation mints. And when he came in that evening, he saw that living room was decorated again, and he was so excited. And then he was passing out his graduation mints. And but the best part was that I still had my robe from my master's graduation, complete with the hood and cap. And so we were able to put that on him, and he took multiple photos wearing that in front of our fireplace, holding his diploma, and then was able to send that to his family. And that was just such a special moment to be able to share with them. Each time we hosted, we were prepared to provide our guests with what they need, but each time we were blessed with others coming to support us. We've had church members slip us money so that to help out with groceries, and family members go grocery shopping with us. We've had people help with the bill at the restaurant and bring us homemade goodies to supplement our breakfasts. And I found this to be a true testimony that if people will respond as they are called and able, then other people will respond and help uphold them. As part of this generosity, we were able to have an African cooking fest in our kitchen. It was very similar to cooking shows you might see on TV. My mother helped me find recipes on the internet of traditional foods from Liberia, the Congo, and Malawi. And when our guests confirmed the authenticity of the recipes and showed so much excitement in being able to make some of their comfort food, the plans were set in motion. My mother and I shopped multiple grocery stores looking for the right greens, because there's a lot more than what we traditionally eat, and the staple ingredient of cassava, which we finally translated into it being a yucca root, although when we showed it to them very excited, because it took 4 grocery stores to find it, they said ours doesn't look like that. But they appreciated the gesture and made do. But it was absolute joy and excitement when they returned home from conference that day to find the ingredients for their respective recipes laid out. And I had grouped them by recipe, each ingredient, but they were grabbing out of other people's piles things that they wanted to be able to use. And then there was quite a bit of banter going back and forth about who should make the nasima, the traditional cornmeal dish, and we had a couple from the Congo, and so Marcel was adamant that his wife, Therese, would make the best nasima and that she should be the one to prepare it. And Chizazo from Malawi said, but I also prepare it in my home, even though I have a wife, I cook the food also, and I can make the nasima. And they finally conceded and let Therese make it, and it passed everyone's standard. They were all very happy, but very exciting to see that going on. In the end, we had a delicious dinner, a fish nasima nendio with okra and greens and rice jollof and cassava from Liberia. And we ate African style with one hand and no utensils with very little talking. We were surprised to find out after talking their ear off through multiple breakfasts that it's kind of rude in their countries to be talking that much during a meal, and so then I tried to not ask questions and talk. But I found that it was growing on them, the idea of having a conversation during the meal, so we could speak. So that was nice. It felt good to honor their traditions, though, as we tried to eat with one hand and roll up the nasima and get the nendio with it. Food was a source of bonding for us, and we would talk about what they had to eat at the Laurel Club, and we all had a good laugh as they described the Jell-O as the dancing food that they ate. And then we had to try to explain why Americans eat it. And that was even harder. It's not a fruit, it's not a vegetable, but I don't know why we eat it. We finally decided it was because it's fun, it dances. We discovered that they miss their own pepper. Our traditional black pepper is not what they were used to, so we found some red pepper flakes that they liked better. And so they took a bottle of red pepper flakes with them every day, like contraband, into the Laurel Club, and they would get together and pepper their food. We talked about pumpkins. The pumpkins was a traditional food, especially in Malawi, that they would eat. And we shared that most Americans don't eat a lot of pumpkins. We sell a lot in the fall, but we buy them and we carve them. And our family likes to roast the seeds. But if we're going to make pumpkin pie or something else, we just buy it in a can. And even then, it's not a big thing to, not one of our staple vegetables. And we told them we were more likely just to carve them or decorate them or paint them and put them on our porch to look pretty. And they were so confused about why we were decorating our food and setting it out to look at until it rotted. It was one of those moments when I felt embarrassed about how I take things for granted because I've never had to go without. And I was very humbled that that's what Americans do with food. And while we've continued to carve pumpkins in our family, it's not without being mindful that we are just playing with our food. We enjoyed extensions of the conference worship at home. My husband Brett enjoys playing hymns on his harmonica, and this became a popular evening activity. Chizazo from Malawi was especially interested in learning how to play, and without any special training, they would sit and work together through a hymn until they got it sounding right, and it was a wonderful way to unwind. One night, however, we enjoyed an enthusiastic worship as tourists led us around the living room in a parade, singing and clapping while we sang, "We are marching in the light of God." And we had 3 languages being sung in our small gathering. And the Spirit of God was with us, reminding us of our common mission. Because of these experiences, I view life differently. When we met Tayamani later that summer, as someone working in the World Service Corps from Tahiti, I recognized that while she had kind of a glamorous job going from activity to activity, doing things, and while she had a very nice host family, that it could be a lonely experience when everything dies down and there's not a lot to do. And because of my past experience, I was able to say, "We'd love to have you come stay with us for the weekend, and we'll take you to the zoo, and we took her to our rodeo in Buckner." That's a real experience. And we were able to open our hearts and homes again for that. Each of these experiences has impacted me and my family. And I've chosen to educate myself more, reading books such as Ending Global Poverty and Toxic Charity. And while I've not reached a position to give substantially, I do give mindfully to organizations that help rather than hinder development. And I now have an app on my phone that challenges me to practice French daily in preparation for any new friends that might come my way. And I hope that I can be as brave as they are to practice speaking a new language. My heart is not the same. My heart now has a deep love and compassion for those families I've come in contact with. Each of their personalities brought a unique component of friendship that I miss in their absence. I feel blessed that we took advantage of the opportunity to serve, and I am glad that we were a bit blinded to the challenges that might come because of our enthusiasm. If we had thought about it making sense, we still would not have accepted the challenge to serve others.
I'm Nathan Twombly, and this is my wife, Carrie. And in a minute, you're going to have the opportunity to give to the Alma Blair Internship Program. But before you do, we wanted to share briefly about our experience as guides in the program and share how your contributions can benefit young adults and the historic sites. So I got to serve, there's me on the left. I got to serve as a guide in Nauvoo in 2000. And the main thing I remember is how much fun I had with the other interns. We would spend so much time with each other, hanging out after work, and seeing these people coming across these photos brought back so many memories. Nauvoo was also an incredible place to connect with church history. The politics, the economics, the social issues, the evolution of religious ideas was so complex, and you could just keep exploring it and never fully grasp it all. And housing Alma Blair there as a teacher was just this great opportunity. And in fact, I remember he took that picture with his brand new digital camera. He was so proud of it. Camera without film. It's amazing. The other thing I learned was how important it is to connect history with personal stories, as we are doing tonight. I can remember taking field trips to Liberty Hall, and to the old State House in Illinois, and many other places with Alma, and hearing stories, these specific, vivid moments from people's lives, and feeling that strong connection to a time and place that was so much more real than any book could ever be. And I felt honored that I could go back from those field trips and connect people with the moments and people that lived at our historic properties, where some of these most consequential moments in our church history happened. So the following summer, I got to return to the program as a guide in Kirtland.
That's where he met me. My grandparents, Ken and Norma Byrne, served as the first bishop for the Kirtland stake, and my mother, who I lost at a very young age, spent her college summers guiding at Kirtland. So I had grown up hearing all these fantastic stories of the area and what it was like to live out there, and so I wanted to experience that for myself. I'm here to tell you it did not disappoint. As I tried to decide what to share with you, I had so much trouble narrowing it down because all these different pictures are racing through my head of all the different experiences that I had, all the different people I met, the other interns, my future husband, the volunteers that were there, the Kirtland congregation, the Mormon sisters down the hill that we got to know, all the travelers that I took on tours. And then there's all the different experiences that we got to have, working in the gardens and next to the Kirtland Temple, talking to the huge bus tours, those were my favorites. Watching the fireworks from the bell tower, ringing the bell on Sunday morning of the temple, exploring that area. And I gained a lot of experience there in public speaking. I'm a teacher now. I teach middle school math, so that helps, and all my ministry with the church. Also, the Kirtland congregation needed a pianist that summer, and I wasn't very good, but they needed me, so I did it. And it gave me a lot of experience, and so now I'm proud to be able to contribute that way at my home congregation at Colburn Road. I don't think I would have done that. I don't think I would have been able to do that without the confidence and the support that they provided. And finally, I think about all the spiritual experiences that poured forth and the testimonies that came from being in Kirtland. I could go on and on and on about what was the best summer of my life.
We had never been that far away from home before for such a long length of time, but in both Kirtland and Nauvoo, we found a caring, supporting congregation. We worshiped with them, we had meals together, we were invited to their homes, and we even went out on several adventures. It was a reminder that wherever you go, you can quickly be welcomed home into a Community Christ congregation. That was just one of our first times being welcomed into a different congregation. So we thank you for listening to our story. And before we give the offering and the prayer, Barb has an announcement to make.
Love at the Kirtland Temple. Who knew? Thank you for sharing of your experience. I also wanted to share that tonight is the first night of the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation's spring campaign. And the reason I mention that is the spring campaign's goal is to fund 4 student internships. The campaign is called 20K by 20 May because it's around May 20th that these summer internships begin. And we would love to fund 4 of those summer internships. Now, I want to take a moment and ask the board members who serve on the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation, if you're a board member, would you mind standing up? The reason I want to highlight these people and perhaps embarrass them a little bit is today they pledged to give $10,000 towards this 20K by 20 May. It's a matching donation. That $10,000 from these generous people will provide 2 of the 4 internships. And so tonight you have an opportunity to double your donation and help meet that goal of 4 internships or $20,000. So thank you to the board members for your generosity, and thank you to all of you. And thank you to all of you who are here, who share generosity throughout the year. You are greatly appreciated, and we certainly appreciate what generosity you give this evening. So before we pass around the hat, or those offering plates, Nathan's going to offer a prayer.
So, loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the rich heritage that we have, for the chance to learn from it, and for the diverse ways that we're able to experience it. We ask that you would bless these gifts that are about to be given, that they would go towards sharing our tradition and for your love with all humankind, and that there would be great joy in the sharing and in the receiving. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, good evening. Hey, Dick. So, I am a convert to the church, and because of that, I don't have as many stories about Brother Everett as everybody else, but because I was a Mormon, I learned how to do things by proxy. So I'm going to invite Steve Graffeo to come up and share with us.
So I called my mom yesterday to kind of inquire a couple of short stories I might tell tonight, and I happened to use the terminology when I explained it to her because she didn't know about this tonight and the way we're doing it. And I said, you know, Mom, they're going to be roasting him. And she goes, oh no, they're going to say a lot of bad things about him. And I said, Mom, I don't know of any bad things about him. So anyway, roasting had that negative connotation, but anyway. So I've always been impressed the way my dad thinks ahead and is prepared for things. And I found out that he really learned that at a young age. So from what I understand, he was around 8 or 9 years old. And something happened, don't know what the event was, but he was in trouble. He got in trouble and came home from school. And my grandma told him, you know what? You're going to be in trouble when your dad gets home. And I guess he knew it because he prepared himself and put a board in his pants, plank, in preparation for what might happen. And so I guess Grandpa kind of came home and took him to the basement and said, son, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, and it did. Because I guess Gramps, spanked him and hit the board, and it hurt. So I guess being prepared to go out on mission, that was part of that. But anyway, so the second little story I have actually comes from the Australian that you spoke of earlier. And I guess In this case, I'm going to mention him. Malcolm Stevenson, along with my dad and Charlie Brown, who is from this congregation, were on a mission trip in Andhra Pradesh, India, on or around 1994. And this trio really ministered well together, and they always had each other's backs, and they just, you know, just really did good ministry together. So on this particular day, I understand that there was baby blessings, and I mean, I hear there were about 120 baby blessings that day. And the story, as I understand it, was that, you know, it was now an hour or so into this process where the three of them were blessing the babies. And my dad opened his eyes and realized he was the only one still there, and his other two cohorts had left the scene and left him there to handle the rest of them himself. You know, to me, that's kind of a unique way of showing brotherly love and ministry together, but whatever. So, anyway, and that is a true story, is that not? Yeah. But anyway, so those are a couple brief stories that I have. Did you want to now open up the mic for others to share? Is that the... All right, so those are my little stories.
All right. Well, for my first part of my story, I want to go really far back in church history to about 316 AD. This guy up here is named St. Martin of Tours. And St. Martin was the very first chaplain. And the reason he got the name chaplain, or we get the idea of a chaplain, is because he was a Christian, and he was also in the cavalry, the Roman cavalry, and he came across a naked beggar, and he knew that Jesus had called all followers to give up their coat. But he also knew that he had to wear his uniform, so he, in that tension, came up with this compromise, and he cut his cloak in half, and he gave half of it to that man. And so the other soldiers started to call him capella, which means half cloak. And so St. Martin there eventually decided he couldn't fight anymore, so he becomes the first Christian conscientious objector. But he doesn't leave his brothers in arms, he travels with them, and he preaches the gospel, and he builds little chapels. We get the idea of a chapel from capella, and of course, you don't have musical instruments in there, so when you're there, you're singing a cappella, right? So chaplain, a cappella. He's the very first one that gives us this idea of going and being a non-combatant. Well, when I was a soldier, a very young soldier in the Army, I was at a service in a chapel, and all I could see as the chaplain was up at the pulpit, all I could see was the cross. I'm wearing my chaplain's cross. All I could see was his cross on his collar. And I had this sense of calling. In fact, I felt these words, take up that cross and follow me. I was a Mormon. Crosses are kind of icky things when you're a Mormon, and yet this cross really spoke to me. And I had this sense that that's what I was supposed to do. And so I went to school to become a chaplain, and somewhere along the way I had a hard time with Mormonism. And I found my way into this funky little church called Community of Christ, and ended up becoming a chaplain for Community of Christ, right? So I became a Navy chaplain. I was in the Army. I said, I am done with the field. I'm going to get on a ship. And the Navy said, oh, you've got all this great experience as a former sergeant. We're going to send you with the Marines. So I spent exactly 0 days on a ship, and I spent all my time with the Marines out in the field. And you might notice, well, maybe you can't see it, but just underneath where it says U.S. Navy, do you see that little insignia that's an eagle, globe, and anchor? That's the holy trinity of the Marine Corps. The eagle, globe, and anchor, the EGA. So even though I was in the Navy, I wore that over my heart, basically, everywhere that I went. And that kind of bothered me a little bit. And so I decided that even closer to my heart, I would carry this. And so every day in Afghanistan, this patch was what was closest to my heart. Because I was challenged. I guess the very first question I got asked when I was interviewed on why should Community of Christ have a chaplain? I was called into the temple, and one of our church leaders, I'm not going to give away his name for the sake of my job, let's call him Brother Murph Scottson. Oh, you guys know Brother Murph. So, Brother Murph said to me, what business does a peace church have? What business does a peace church have sending out a military chaplain? And I gave a pretty lame response. But as I served, it became more and more clear to me. And the moment of clarity came in a place called Helmand Province in Afghanistan, in a town called Sangin. I was there at a base called Fob Jackson, and I was leading a service that all of you would recognize as a Community of Christ service. In fact, I was right in the middle of the prayer for peace. I had just lit the candle, and the officer of the deck came in and interrupted the service. Now, there's only one moment that's sacred time in an infantry battalion, and it's that worship service. Chaplain doesn't get any other sacred time. They don't interrupt the chaplain's service. There's nothing else happens as long as it isn't urgent. So when my service gets interrupted, something's gone wrong. Officer of the deck comes in and he says, "Chaps, I need everybody to stay put after your service." All right, what's going on? We do have some kids. I'm not going to use the language he used. He said, we got some incoming just behind the chapel here, and I heard some noise, and I wasn't sure. There's a lot of noise going on though in a combat zone. Right behind me, that chapel was basically a bunker, and right behind me there were incoming rounds. Now I want you to think about how we all share the same prayer for peace on Sundays. All of these communities of Christ throughout the world sharing the same prayer for peace. And here I am reading this, and it struck me that I was part of this community, this global community, sharing the same prayer. And yet nobody knew that on this Sunday, that one of their chaplains, who had this seal in his pocket, would be reading this prayer for peace while machine gun fire was raining down on this little chapel. And in the prayer, the words said, "God, forgive us. Forgive us for all the times that we forget to uphold the beauty of creation and the worth of all persons." And the rounds came in. God, forgive us for the places where war reigns and where people die. And I thought about Brother Murph's question, what business do we have as a peace church? And I thought, you know what, where else should we be? In that place, with those Marines and sailors gathered around, because I had a captive audience, right? They couldn't go anywhere. We had an extended conversation after that service, and I decided to share one of my favorite verses of Scripture by Saint Nietzsche. Now, I know Nietzsche said that God is dead, but he's learned better by now. As a young undergrad, I read something of his, and it didn't make sense at first. Not completely. He said, "Those who hunt monsters must take care lest they become monsters themselves. For if you stare into an abyss for too long, the abyss stares back into you." And I talked to them about that we couldn't lose our humanity in the midst of what was going on there. That I had heard them say things like, when the dead had come in, "Oh, it's just an Afghan." That they were dehumanizing the enemy, and even those just civilians that were around us, just because of the horrors of it. They didn't want to face it. But I knew that if we dehumanized and othered people in that situation, that there would be hell to pay when we came home, that we couldn't lose our humanity. And so I lifted up peace the best I could, and I shared a message that was authentic to Community of Christ. The last thing I want to share with you that I carried in my pocket was this crucifix. It was given to me by a Vietnam veteran named Pete. Pete lived nearby in California where I was stationed. He carried this every day with him in Vietnam, which is where it got about 90% of it beat up as much as it is. I added a little bit to it. He carried it every day. I carried it every day in my pocket next to the seal. One day I had a Catholic Marine come up to me, and he said, "Chaps, before I left home, I wanted my priest to bless my rosary, but I ran out of time. Can you bless my rosary for me?" And I was about to say, you know, that's really outside of my comfort zone. I don't really do that. I mean, my church does some really crazy stuff sometimes, but I've never seen that. And then I remembered, you know what, I'm carrying Pete's Vietnam rosary in my pocket. And so I wrote down the prayer as best I could remember it. This is what I said. First, I took out my rosary, and I took it and I put it with his, and we held both of them in our hands together up on the hill overlooking that Sangin River Valley. And this is what I said as we prayed. I said, "Brother, God is everywhere. Everywhere and everything is sacred. But if we need reminders that God is with us, then may it be so. Remember, even in the desert of war, even in the Sangin Valley and the shadow of death, God is always with you. No matter what happens, God your Father, God your brother, God the Comforter, one God, Mother of us all. Amen." As I left that place, the very last service, likely the last Christian service that's been held there, I played Peace, Salam, Shalom, the peace talk, the video that the church produced. Normally I did not turn up the volume during our worship services because you didn't want to call attention. I cranked it up that last time, and I sent that message throughout that war-torn valley, and I saw images of friends, of Zach Mack beating his drum, of Community of Christ folks proclaiming peace.
Could there have been any more variety tonight in storytelling? It has been very moving for all of us. Yes, bud. He and I retired in 2000 together, and they had this reception for us. I don't remember all the things that happened there, but I can remember we came in kind of together, and we went out together, and we're still together.
So for that reason, I would not miss storytelling about Everett. I went to the storytelling about Wallace B. Smith, and I went to the storytelling of F. Henry Edwards, and I didn't say anything. But I'm not going to be still, Everett. Everett's been my friend for a long, long time. Before appointment, we go back to school-age kids. When Everett went to Tahiti, he told you about about going directly to church off the plane. But they let him settle in with his family for a little while, and then came the day to kind of earn his spurs, which meant going out to the Tuamotu and being a missionary under the guidance of Abrahama Fa'ura. Abrahama was almost an icon in Tahiti. Abrahama's one problem was he got terribly seasick. So when Everett and Abrahama went down to the wharf in Papeete, they boarded a copra boat. The copra boats go from island to island, and eventually they are hauling dried raw coconut. So they're kind of messy boats, they're kind of work boats, they're not comfortable. So when Abrahama got on the boat, he closed his eyes, pulls a blanket over his head, and you don't see him until you get to the land. Everett is a little nervous. This is the first time he's left Judy and the kids in Papeete. It's the first time he's really going to be challenged with the Tahitian language. And so he's laboring on the boat, not much to do. But at night, he's by the rail, not quite acquainted with the swells of the sea, and he goes overboard. The copra boat's a diesel engine. Chug, 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 chug. They don't hear him. He's out in the middle of the South Pacific. Everett's not a bad swimmer, but he has no idea where he is. Finally, he begins to feel the swell. Seems to be carrying him in a certain direction. He lays back on his back, and eventually sees he's drifting toward a small island. He's out there the balance of the night. Finally, his feet start to touch the coral. He gets up on a beach. He's so exhausted, he just lays back and goes sound asleep. When he awakens with the sun in his face in the morning, he looks at his hands. They are dark red. His feet are dark red. The white sand on the beach has become dark red. Finally, it dawns on Everett, he says, you know, I've been marooned. That's what storytellers do. I want to briefly mention a true story. Everett and I began our ministry essentially as ministers to youth. And Everett was very interested in what I was doing in the Center State as youth minister. And when he went to Tahiti, he began to see that his real legacy of Tahitian ministry was to train other people to take his place. That is a legacy that needs to be done by every appointee minister, but not always achieved. But Everett decided that his primary contribution to French Polynesia was to develop a cadre of skilled and trained youth leaders. He asked me to help him with that in a kind of a minor way, George Knopf, who I had gone to Graceland with, and who was the sculptor of the Jayhawk at KU, made up a symbol called the agape symbol. And it's a triangle and a cross and a circle. And Everett wrote to me from Papeete and said, "Can you get me that symbol? I want to use it here in Tahiti." We had Camp Agape at Guthrie Grove. George had made a wooden block mold in which he could pour pewter, and he stamped out agape symbols that we gave at the end of youth camp. Everett took that symbol, and as a symbol of graduation, when he finished a fairly extensive training program for youth leaders in Tahiti, he had a corps of about 12, Everett? Yeah, 15. He took that pewter agape symbol to the goldsmith in Papeete and had some gold symbols made to give to those leaders when they finally graduated or were trained in their program. Shortly after that happened, on my way to Australia, I stopped by to see Everett. And in front of these leaders, Everett gave me one of those gold agape emblems. I was thrilled. It made me feel close to Everett. I knew what had been involved and how to get, and I was pleased to be identified with those leaders. It was an expensive piece of jewelry, actually. After I took that home, I got thinking about where did that come from? How did Everett happen to have an extra gold agape symbol to give to me? The more I thought about it, it came from Judy. Judy gave up her symbol for me. In a little while, I got along with Judy, and I said, "This belongs to you." I did not in any way want to dishonor the recognition Everett gave to me. It was important. But I think I want all of you to know, behind anyone who is famous and important is a very good woman who is the wife. And Judy, we love you.
Before Everett closes this evening, I just wanted to share of your amazing generosity. The total in donations this evening was $2,682.50. Thank you so very much for your grace and generosity.
There was supposed to be time for you to share. I think we've come to a point, though, that the Spirit would say, not only spiritually and mentally, but also physically, that it's the time that we need to close. And I want to do it in this way, in the hosting sense. The first time I left Orissa and actually Gumiguda, the elders and the deacons were there together to say goodbye, and we were getting into the Jeep. They did something to me that really caused me disturbance and caused me a problem. Because I didn't understand. It's like Sarah was talking about the misunderstanding of things. And I came to a point in time, though, in which I fully incorporated that into my own way of sensing the presence of a relationship that was very, very deep. And in my closing, passing on the mantle of the apostle for that field to Dale Luffman, I did this. I went that night before the goodbye meeting of the next morning, and I said, what is it, Lord, that I need to do? Well, I told you what you do when you arrive, and that is you wash feet. Your feet are washed, and how humbling it is to have your feet washed. But they do something else at the departure. Now, I don't know whether they continue to do that, Rick. I'm not sure, and Mark. I want to demonstrate it to you and see what you feel. I'm trying to think who I would ask to do this with me without knowing what you are getting yourself into. I was the presiding evangelist for 6 years. My counselor, or not counselor, my secretary was Jim Tabor. He became a good friend. I'm going to ask Jim if you wouldn't come up here, if you wouldn't mind. Or whatever. You don't have to say anything. This is a goodbye moment. And there are goodbye moments in all our lives, just like there is a welcoming moments. So that in every welcome, it was always that Judy and I would say, or I'd come here to the congregation, and they'd say, not, I'm glad to see you, maybe they'd say that, but when are you leaving again? That was the first question, when are you leaving again? And so departures are very important, because all of us will have a final departure, of course, and how we do that is very significant. The Sorrow tribal leaders, the first time that we were leaving, they knelt at my feet. And I thought, oh, they're worshiping me. I don't want that. And then they would do this. And each one of them would do that. Rub the dust of my feet and my shoes. Kiss their hands where the dust had, where they had touched my feet, and then wipe it on their shirt. My first intent was say, no, don't do that. But it came to realize that is the moment, perhaps, that Jesus was washing feet. Don't do that to me. And so in my final departure from India was, you know, there are 3 or 4 maybe over the 40 years of that ministry that stand out to me. And this is the one that doesn't take priority over the other 2 or 3, but stands as one of the most meaningful moments in my ministry. We were circled about and saying kind of the final goodbyes and having prayer, and then I stood and they were all seated on cots. That was their chairs. And I said, I'm going to do something now that you're not going to want me to do. And they chuckled a little bit and smiled and couldn't figure out what that might be. And the deacon from Gumiguda, tall, slender, he might not even be alive again. A man, when I first met him and we were in class, he was talking about the land or the world being flat, and couldn't understand how, I would say, 12 hours difference between where I lived and where they lived and where we were there together. But this deacon had always been so generous to me. And so I started with him. And what was the first thing was, don't do that to me. And as I went around the circle and did it to each of those elders, it was a closing moment for me. And I came to Brother Dale, and he was the only one with socks on. Everybody else had no shoes, and Dale had his socks. And so I get to him in front of him and say, he said, Everett, are you going to do that to me? And I said, yes, Dale, you need it also. And I took his socks off, and I rubbed his feet, and kissed him, and put his dirt of his feet. There is a connection that happens between persons. And is there anything more, not so much humbling, as real as the dirt of the earth, and to kiss it off the feet of another servant, and to carry that with you? I didn't wash my shirts, and I'm sure they did too, so the dust wasn't there, but symbolically, it was one of the most meaningful moments in my ministry. I only say that because this is my best friend. Thanks, Jim. Now, how will you say goodbye to each other? Is a question. How will we say goodbye? How will we depart each other? And what kind of testimony do we carry with us after this evening's testimony? I hope everybody lived through the countries that Rick told about. I hope everybody felt like, well, maybe I better have some Tahitians or some Germans or some Africans in my home this summer. IYF is coming up. Maybe I better have some of those. Maybe I'd learn something.
Call me, I'm in charge of the international.
There you go. That's good, Medora. That's my daughter-in-law, so that's prime. What Sarah taught me tonight was wonderful. And then to hear the testimony of a man takes peace to a world. So, what are you going to do in departure? How will we depart each other? Let me offer prayer, and then let's do it, whatever that might be. Eternal and loving God, we are grateful for what we have shared this evening and the spirit of this hour. It is because of your grace and your sense of caring for each one of us that we have come in response to the Spirit. This is a good place to be tonight. This is a place where we'll hear a story, a 2, 3, that are going to be something that will touch my heart. And I pray, Lord, that that has taken place tonight. A still small voice, or a very loud one perhaps, that urges each one of us to do more than what we would normally have taken upon ourselves. And we do it in faith, and that we are unafraid to move and to make decisions that under your Spirit will bring forth your kingdom. We're grateful for those that were shared, and we know that there are many, many more stories that need to be told, need to be expressed, not only to the members of the church or to the church fellowship, but to our neighbors, to our children, and to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They need to hear our stories, don't they, Lord? So help us to find the moment, because it is so easy to pass by the moment that is so precious. And we ask that there will be opportunities for us, not next week or next year, but even at this hour, when we return home, on the morrow in the classroom, in our Sunday schools. May our testimony of your church in the world will bring enlightenment and understanding and growth and success that brings about your peace here on earth. And we do so with much appreciation for this evening. And in the name of Christ we pray. Amen. See you at the next one.
Before everybody leaves,
That's right, there is.
we have snacks in the back, and we have a birthday cake in the back. So we need to sing. Would somebody please start Happy Birthday?
Happy birthday.